Hello again. This is Dr. Stacey and Dr. Bob talking about stuff related to ICES-PEMF and introducing Stacey. She's going to lead the conversation today.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Dr. Bob Dennis. I'm Dr. Stacey Ravid, and we're going to focus on the M1 micropulse today. So this is the M1, and I consult with patients and individuals that either have the micropulse or are thinking about buying it. And I've had quite a few questions regarding the protocols. So today we are going to focus on those questions. And without further ado, the first question is, why does each micropulse in the M1 have various protocols?
There's probably two reasons for that. One is that there's a fair amount of individual variability. I did a lot of field testing with this with real people. How well does it work? And there's about a 15 or 20% variation between people where they'll say a certain pulse pattern. When we say protocol, what we mean is a pattern of pulses, maybe 10 hertz for a few minutes, then, higher or lower frequency. Most of our devices, most of our settings change the frequency, and changing the frequency is more important than having the exactly correct frequency. That's what you really want to keep in mind. It's to prevent neuroaccommodation or habituation, because all biological systems, if you give them the same stimulus over and over, they tune it out. So you need to change the stimulus in order for it to continue to work. You can actually test this yourself. If you don't mind doing a gross experiment, you can push the side of your eye. And if you push enough to stop your eye from doing its natural movement, if it fixates its gaze, your living, perfectly functional eye, if it stops moving and fixates its gaze on one point, it takes about 2 to 3 seconds and your whole retinal image will fade. It'll freak you right out. It'll turn completely gray. And then you'll pull your finger away thinking, oh my God, I just made myself blind, and boop, your eye moves and the image comes back, because your retina can only take the same visual stimulus for 2 or 3 seconds. That's just normal for a biological system. So let me just start out by saying, you can talk all you want about different frequencies, but the really important thing is to change them. It's not important to get a precisely correct resonant one with the earth or anything, because that's all nonsense. What's important is that your body will get used to it, and you need to change it. And you can see this in all kinds of things. But like I said, the retinal image, exercise, everything. You want to change the stimulus slightly to reduce habituation. So with that being said, why do we have different patterns? Because different people vary in their responsiveness to these different patterns. The Omni 8 pattern that we have on like the A9, that seems to work pretty well for almost everybody, for almost everything. But some people want to try using it for different things, especially around their central nervous system. In which case, the frequencies do two different things. You can get one is this strange reduced inflammation effect, but the other thing is you can get brain entrainment. And in that case, frequencies do matter much more, because if you're sort of on the lower end, you're sort of, delta, theta, you're more talking about sleep. When you get into like alpha waves, you're talking about alert, calm, awareness. Different frequencies do different things in terms of stimulating the central nervous system. So you're getting two effects when you're doing one stimulus. Like if you're stimulating at like 3 or 4 pulses per second, you're kind of sort of putting yourself to sleep, in addition to reducing the inflammation in your head, in your cranium. But if you bump that up to 15 pulses per second, then you're bringing yourself into a state of alertness, but you're also doing the anti-inflammatory effect. And and this is something I'm doing experiments right now, if you bring it up to 45 to 55 pulses per second, that's a gamma range, that kind of starts to scramble what's going on in your head. And that actually can promote neuroplasticity. And it's really quite uncomfortable, because it's jarring but it has, in addition to that uncomfortable neurological effect, it still has the same tissue effect of reduced inflammation. So you got to kind of think these things through. So if you want to use a unit on your head, you might want to keep the frequencies below 25 or 30 pulses per second. But you can see from some of the papers that I've published, what matters is your dosage for PEMF. And your dosage is the intensity times the number of pulses. I published this recently that we can show this in plant growth. Plants are not capable of having a placebo response, but you can see that 3 pulses per second times 1 hour gives you the same, well, say 15 pulses per second for 1 hour gives you the same number of pulses as 3 pulses per second for 5 hours. And both of those have the same biological effect. They have the same dosage because they're the same number of pulses. Do you see why? One's going pulsing 5 times faster, but you do it for 1/5 of the length of time. So it's this thing that people don't understand. You're not looking at the frequency. You really want to know the number of pulses, the intensity of the pulse, and how quickly that pulse is changing up and down magnetically. Those are the things that matter. And the different patterns on the M1, C5, the B5, they allow you to combine different neurological effects with carefully tuned pulses that will reduce inflammation, that our testing or independent laboratory testing shows that it does. And frankly, different people respond differently. I was at a meeting one time and a woman stepped up to me and she goes, "This is the greatest thing in the world to induce sleep. I use it on Delta every night." And the woman right behind her says, "Delta doesn't work for me at all. I use Theta."
Wow.
And for sleep. And they started arguing. And then a woman behind them said, "No, Delta and Theta aren't the best ones." And she had a different one. And the 3 women were arguing. I wasn't even in the conversation. They're like, no, I use this one every night. The other ones don't do anything for me. It's because of individual variation. It's not like all of us respond the same way to this same stimulus the same way. So you got a little unit, it gives you some chance, some different options, and you can experiment with those. So there you go. The reason is that sometimes you're doing different things to different tissues that may or may not include your central nervous system, right? Your brain and your spinal cord. If you're not including that, then this entrainment effect isn't really there. But still, for the anti-inflammatory effect, some people respond a little bit better to high frequencies. Some people respond a little better to low frequencies.
Okay.
So that's the reason. It's that people vary.
Good answer. Why did you select the B5C5 protocol as the basic protocol for the M1?
Well, we've changed. We don't really set it to B5C5 anymore. That's very close to the Omni 8 protocol. It's pretty close in a lot of ways. We just set a default, and we've decided now to set all the defaults at Omni 8. So when we ship them out for the last year or two, they've been set to Omni 8, because what we're trying to do is set it to the one protocol that has the most benefit for the most people, for the most range of applications, which so far as we can tell is the Omni 8.
Okay. Is it true that you cannot change the protocols while the micropulse is being used, and in a protocol, it has to be before you turn it on?
You can adjust the protocols when you turn it on. You get 4 seconds to make each change. You get 4 seconds, it introduces this, the device, and tells you which firmware version you have. The next screen, you can set the intensity. You get 4.5 seconds. If you don't touch a switch, then it goes to the next screen, which allows you to set the protocol. If you don't touch a switch, then 4.5 seconds later, it automatically starts. There's several reasons for this, but the main one is that in the earlier models, people were switching their protocols all the time in their pocket or whatever. And they're like, can you lock it out? Can you put an extra switch on there? Can you make it so that it's not adjustable once I get it running? I had it just the way I wanted it. So the point here is, when you start it up, it goes to the last protocol settings you used last time. And then once it starts, it does not allow you to change those. If you want to change them, it's simple. Turn it off. One Mississippi, turn it on, reset it.
Good. A man who is using it for prostate pain had an excellent question. He said, when you're trying a new protocol, how long do you recommend that you use that protocol for, to see if it will work for pain relief or inflammation?
That is an excellent question, actually. And that's the one that I have the hardest time answering, because some people respond pretty quick and some people take a long time. And Bill Pollock and I have talked about this, and when people would come in with back pain, he would put it on their back and they would be complaining about their pain and how nothing worked and everything. He'd have them sit down, and he had a 90-minute first clinical meeting with people. 90 minutes. And he said it would take about 10. The first thing he would do is put the device on. It would take about 10 minutes to put it on, maybe at the most. And then about 40 minutes later, typically people would be like, hey, where's my pain? It's gone, for the first time ever. They just notice it because it's very subtle, right? But some people take shorter than that. Like I only take about 10 or 15 minutes and then my pain just melts away. Other people, they take a few hours, even a few days for some people. But, to get the cumulative effect. But so it's really hard to say. Once again, it's individual variation. So I would say when experimenting on yourself to find the right protocol, go ahead and put it on there, put it on medium intensity, 8 or 9 or 10, probably 9 or 10 for an M1. And then if you notice that it gets worse, sometimes that'll happen within a half an hour or an hour, then try something different. Usually it's coil placement, move the coils. Right. If it seems to stay about the same, I would stick with it for a day or so.
Okay.
And then if it's not getting any better after 2 or 3 days, try a different coil placement, try a different pulse protocol. And I know this sounds like you could be doing this forever, but actually the fact is the average person only has to try about 3 or 4 things until they find something that works.
Right. I've talked to many people who've used the micropulse, and quite a few of them have told me that after they experimented, they ended up finding what worked for them. So it is very individual. And once you find what that is, it's amazing. What is the benefit of the 5-minute rest period at the end of each cycle?
Some people have a little bit of fatigue. A stimulus is a stimulus, and sometimes you just need to stop. It used to be a 20-minute rest cycle, but people would complain because in 20 minutes, their pain would come back. So we reduced it. It used to be 10 minutes, like the original Omni 8, the A9 was 10 minutes at 5 hertz, 10 minutes at 100 hertz, in one polarity, 10 minutes and 100 hertz, the other polarity, and then 20 minutes off. That was way back years ago. And people would be like, oh, the device isn't working. Why is it flashing yellow and all this stuff? I don't use those, but as long as you keep that off period short, it's just like a lot of things. It can make the overall performance better because you're not just continuously blasting a person.
Okay, great. If you would bring up the protocol menu for the M1 and we'll take a look at it. And there's some questions regarding the menu.
So what this is the quick start sheet, and you can get it right on our product page. You just go to click on the M1 products, and it's right at the top 1 or 2 PDFs you can click on. You can get this for free, and it's right there. And that's what we're going to look at now. So what do we have here? This is the Model M Quick Start Guide. We're looking at the PDF, and what Stacey's referring to here are these protocols. So these protocols in the pastel boxes are the different types of protocols that we have on the M1.
Okay, so there are several questions regarding this. One is the different colors that you've chosen. Is there any meaning to the colors, meaning going from light to dark, or are they just random colors?
The colors themselves are random.
Okay.
Because I'm just trying to show contrast between groups.
Okay.
Right? It's just like, think of it as a highlighter. So the top group is blue, but you'll notice it's the same color as the bottom group, which is the same as the top group plus a 5-minute rest period. So those groups are basically similar. Then the next group down is yellow. Those are the Schumann resonances. I do not think that they work for the reason people say they work, because I think that's fraud, but I think they work simply because they're in about the right frequency range to work, which is somewhere between 2 and 30 hertz, generally speaking. But if that works for you and you believe that kind of stuff and you want Schumann frequencies, and then the reason they're on there is because many people asked for them. So it's easy enough for me to put them on there, and I happen to know they work, right? So they're there. There's a group of them. And then
Quick
this
question.
red kind of
Hold on real quick. Quick question about the Schumann that somebody had. Are there more than 5 Schumann?
resonances. Yeah, those are called harmonics.
Okay.
And that comes from something called FF. Well, actually, in this case, they're measured harmonics. So like if you like bang cymbals together, you get a primary frequency, and then about double that, you get another vibration, and then about not quite perfectly double that, you get another vibration. And the reason these numbers aren't perfectly double, like 7 and 14 and 20 and 27, 33, the reason it doesn't quite double is because the Schumann resonance is actually a real thing that you can actually measure if you have the right instruments. The instrument just detecting Schumann resonance, you need a whole building full, well, at least a whole, room full of detectors, and you're detecting slight changes in the shape of the ionosphere around the Earth. So it's basically like a big spherical bell, and every time a lightning strike goes, it rings that bell, and that happens on average about 7 times per second on Earth. So it's not that the Earth has some kind of special resonance, it's that the Earth has about 7 or 8 lightning strikes a second, and that causes the ionosphere spherical bell to vibrate, and it vibrates in different directions. And because of its shape and the nature of it and everything, it tends to vibrate at 7.83 hertz. And then you see another peak at 14.3, and then 20.8 and 27.3.
Wow.
33.8.
Okay, great. And then the next protocol, the pink, one of the questions was, what does PPS stand for exactly?
Exactly. So you'll see it's on the bottom line down here where it says note, hertz means pulses per second, PPS. Now, I'm a nerd engineer, and actually hertz doesn't exactly mean what people think it means, because you're referring to a frequency, and a frequency technically defined is the first time derivative of phase. And since you don't know what that means, it's not helpful unless you're a geek nerd, sort of physics, electrical engineer kind of person like me. That really applies to sinusoids. But a lot of people love the word frequency, and because it sounds so sciencey and everything. It's actually pulses per second. But nowadays with computer clocks and everything, we say, oh, this computer clock is at 35 megahertz. That's not exactly right. Because if you're talking about, like, say 10 hertz, you're talking about pure sinusoid at 10 hertz, which what we're really doing is not even square waves at 10 hertz. We're doing individual narrow pulses 10 times per second. So that's 10 pulses per second. But for the average person who's not a physicist, you can go ahead and use them interchangeably. You can say hertz or pulses per second. However, I feel the responsibility as a scientist to use the correct, precise terminology, not because I'm trying to impress people, but because when the day comes that I start to get attacked by scientists for, being a charlatan, I can say I have used precise scientific terminology the whole time. Right. So I'm defending myself against the future attacks, which I know will come. When scientists try to debunk you, the very first thing they do is say, you're not even using that word correctly.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is I'm using the word correctly.
Okay. So going on to the.
Actually, let me tell you why that's pink. That one's pink. That color sort of does mean something.
Okay.
All the other protocols, you'll notice they're not continuous pulse stream. They vary. They'll change from one frequency, to another. Those are fixed. If you're going at 2 pulses per second, it will continue to generate 2 pulses per second until the battery runs out. The reason I have that as pink is that when I used to make those for people, there were some people who would just insist, oh, there was a paper that said, 5 hertz works, so it must be exactly 5 hertz. Which of course is nonsense. But if people demand having a single steady frequency, they need to know that they're going to habituate to it and it will become less effective over time because your body will start to ignore it. There's a whole reason for that. Your body only has the energy to listen to things that contain information. If something does not contain information, then your nervous system doesn't have the extra energy to keep track of it. That's why you lose track of, the weight of your clothing on your body and all these other things that are kind of constant, right? And a constant stream of pulses with no change contains zero information. So your body will eventually tune it out. That's just a science fact. And that's why I make that sort of a little bit red, say, okay, if you're going to use this, make sure you realize this isn't something you should continuously stimulate yourself with. But there are reasons why people want to use that. And there are reasons we use that in a study. Like we use 10 pulses per second in a study with Bill Pollock, for the simple reason that if we used anything else, the statisticians would be screaming at us, okay, which frequency is it? The first one, or the second one, and the third one? You don't have the statistical power and you can't tell the difference between them. So what people need to know is that for the purposes of a scientific publication, you sometimes must absolutely do something that is not quite right, just so that you can make the statistics tractable, so that you can make the statistical calculation work. Because if you start changing something, then they add that as another parameter, and you need 4 times as many samples to do to a different group. So just to do all the possible comparisons. So very often, almost nobody knows this, including probably 90% of scientists don't know this, that doing some of the times you have to, sometimes in designing an experiment for a statistical test scientifically, you must do it suboptimally. You must do it in a way that's oversimplified. Otherwise, you simply can't take enough data to have the statistical power to draw a conclusion.
That was well said. I certainly know about that.
Yeah, I know you do. But the thing is that the average person out there doesn't know that, right? And it's like that's why you never want to try to do exactly what's in a paper. You want to do what the people who know how it works tells you is the best thing to do, is because scientific papers never really optimize things, because they can't. The real world is too complex.
Okay. Well, let's stay on track, because we're going to just focus on the M1, and we're going to go on to the next section. Anything else about the pink section?
Nope. Just be a little bit aware that you shouldn't use that continuously for months, because it will slowly become less effective. However, if you do change up the frequencies, we found that they do not lose effectiveness for like up to a decade.
Oh, okay.
That strategy is probably one of the most successful things I've done with this technology, is by changing the pulse pattern. You do not accommodate to it. You do not habituate to it, and you do not tune it out. So it seems to work for a long time.
Okay.
Right.
The next one, the low power TMS.
So TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. A TMS device is exactly the same as PEMF. It's just a very specific type. Now, the problem with TMS is that they did all of their FDA testing with the power turn way up. So they run it at something called 110 to 120% MT, which is motor threshold. So literally when they put it on your head over your premotor area, it makes you twitch. Every time a pulse comes through, you twitch, because it's above the motor threshold. It's stimulating action potentials to contract muscles. That was what they tested for, for example, for reducing depression. But everyone who uses those devices will tell you, geez, you don't need to use that much power. You can use 10% of that or less. And then the only contraindication for that treatment for severe depression is that it can cause seizures, but it can only cause seizures in people because they use way too much power. They're causing people to contract uncontrollably. So 0.5% of people who get that treatment, TMS treatment for depression, chronic intractable depression, 0.5% also get seizures from this treatment. But this device doesn't have nearly that amount of power. So I'm calling it essentially low power TMS. This is not FDA approved, and many doctors will not do the right thing that they know works better and is much safer. which means turning down the power simply because it's not FDA approved as soon as they turn the power down on their clinical TMS devices.
Okay, interesting.
So I'm saying if you actually read the scientific literature, they're saying, we need to do this. And then other people are saying, yeah, you want to wait another 10 years and spend another $100 million proving what we already know. So what's happening is that doctors all across the country are quietly turning it down because they know it works better and it's safer.
Okay.
They can't do that. So anyway, if somebody wants to do that protocol, all it is 10 pulses per second. It's exactly the FDA approved protocol. This is not an FDA approved device for the two different time periods that are approved for treatment, 30 minutes and 60 minutes, then it turns off.
Okay. The next section, several people have had questions about that one. It's the lavender and its experiment with brainwave entertainment. So tell us about that, Bob.
It's entrainment, right? So it's
what did I say?
I think you might have said entertainment, but it's very
entertaining when I use that.
Well, that's what the word looks like, right? I mean, if you're reading it, it looks like it says brainwave entertainment, but it's entrainment, which of course means you're using a frequency to bring the brainwaves into that frequency, right?
Right.
And there you go. So what's the question?
Okay, so the question about that one is, of the different waves, the alpha wave, beta wave, delta, theta, gamma wave, is there one particular wave that might be best for dementia and Alzheimer's type illnesses?
My opinion, based upon talking to people, I think alpha or the beta waves might be best. And that's because it tends to entrain the wave into a calm alertness, especially alpha wave. So it's not irritating to people, but it makes them alert but calm. And it also simultaneously will reduce inflammation, which might be the root cause of their problem, inside their cranium, the physical problem. So you get the dual benefit of entraining the brain waves to get the kind of brain behavior you want, but you're also getting a reduction of inflammation.
Okay. Okay. So one of the other questions about this protocol is, when they select this protocol and they put it on, is it going through all those different waves? Does it start with alpha?
It's a wave, so it changes from 10 and it kind of grows up. It does go up in steps, but gradually to 13, and then it comes back down to 10 and goes back up to 13. So it's basically like a wave. That's why I call it beta 1 wave. It's a wave between the lower frequency and the higher frequency.
Their question is, does it travel through all those waves in one setting or one protocol, or are they separate? Just the alpha wave, when you
set alpha wave, it'll go from 10 hertz to 13 back to 10, like on a ramp. So it'll go
okay.
How long does it go through one cycle? 10 minutes. How about beta 1? How long does it go through one cycle? 4 minutes. And this is all based upon what I could glean from the literature. Like alpha waves tend to be in that range, 10 to 13 hertz, and they tend to cycle up and down, and it tends to be over about 10 minutes average for the average person. So this is like replicating what's really going on. Anyone who tells you, brain waves are this precise monotonic thing, they're simply wrong. That's just not how they work. And not everybody responds the same way.
Okay. Okay. So I just want to clarify, when they put it on this protocol, it's not automatically going through all the different waves.
Nope. You set one and it goes through that one over and over and over again. So if you set it to delta wave, it'll go 1.5 hertz to 3 hertz, back to 1.5 hertz, back to 3 hertz, back to 1.5 hertz, back to 3 hertz, over and over and over again in a 20-minute cycle time until it's off. That's how it works. So otherwise it would be giving you this calm alertness that you get with alpha and beta waves. And all of a sudden it'd be putting you to sleep. All of a sudden, you get up to gamma and it'd be jarring you uncomfortably awake. So it doesn't go through all of those. So I don't have a sleep cycle built into it because everybody's going to be different anyway. So,
okay, that explains it very well. And then last, the rest periods between cycles.
That group is just the same as the top group. That's blue pastel. It's just that I've added a 5-minute rest there because some people continuous stimulation is just too much.
Mhm.
Just give them a little bit of a rest. And then for the rest of the time it's being stimulated, it's actually more effective.
Okay. Then another question about the protocols. Is there timing they want to know about? Is there a time of day in terms of the wake sleep cycle of a normal individual? So he's saying wake at 7 a.m., going to bed at 10 p.m. Are there certain protocols that are better for the morning times or the evening times when you're
It depends on what you're doing. Like if you're a night watchman, you're going to want to be alert all night.
Mhm.
You're going to want to sleep during the day. So it has less to do with the time of day and more to do with where your alertness is in your own personal circadian rhythm.
Mhm.
But I would, if you're going to play with this, I would look up alpha and, I'd look up brainwave entrainment and find out which brainwaves do what you're trying to accomplish at a certain time of day. And then I would use it. Like if you're on the night shift and you want to go to sleep at 8 a.m, then you want to use delta wave or theta wave at 8 a.m to help you, go to sleep. And then if you want to wake up fully and be alert and calm, like having a coffee, you want to do that when you wake up at maybe 10 p.m, right? But if you're like a person on a normal daytime schedule, you would invert that. The thing to do is simply use, understand what each of these does. And you need to find that for yourself. If you're going to do this to your brain, you need to do the effort of finding what these things supposedly do.
Okay.
And because I cannot give you a prescription for it. And then you have to experiment with it. Okay, do you react that way? And then you have to use it during the time of day that's appropriate for you.
Okay, good. When you turn on the micropulse, it is set to the previous setting that you had it at. So the next question is there a way to block some of the settings? This individual had tried some of the settings and protocols and didn't feel that they worked for them, but they had like favorites of protocols. Is there a way to save the protocols into favorites and then ones that are non-favorites?
So this is one of those engineering trade-offs. The short answer is no.
Mhm.
The thing is that the more flexibility you want, the more complex it is to set up.
Mm.
Okay. The more you want it to do, the harder it is for everyone to use. So at some point you have to limit the complexity of a system. Like if we let you, if I let you go through each one and flag it, then that would be another thing you have to do. It would take another button. It would take another thing, so I'm trying to get it to the minimum amount of complexity that does everything that it needs to do, because all of their favorite protocols are available. It's just they have to scroll through them.
Mhm.
So that's not asking for much, rather than layering on another level of complexity, additional cost with additional buttons that everyone else isn't going to use, or maybe just a few people are going to use. So it's like, could it do that is the wrong question. Of course it could. I could make it do that, but I specifically don't, because that's part of the trade-off. And some people might say, well, I'd really like that.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of product features I would really like, but that's not what everyone wants. So when you get a product that's produced, you have to, you have to include some things, and other things you have to say that would be a nice feature,
I understand.
but I can't really add that. And that, yeah, that's one of the features. There's a few other features, like being able, like some people ask me a similar question, which is, can I pick a sequence? Can I flag
Right.
it so that it'll go through Schumann 1 and then Schumann 2 and then Schumann 4 and then Schumann 5 and then something else? That would be great for them. I've had precisely one person ask me for that. So if I put in the 100 hours of engineering, testing, and developing, and then I make it that much more complex, and everybody else has to not use that feature because it's not really useful for them. It's
Okay.
just, yeah, it's
That
like,
makes sense. So right now, the memory that the micropulse has is when you turn it on, it will be on the previous setting that you put a protocol at, correct?
it will. The only thing is, you'll notice that sometimes that doesn't work. And the reason that doesn't work is because you've been running it in your pocket for many hours, then the battery will die. And then after a certain amount of time, the battery comes back. That's like being turned on. But if it's in your pocket, the buttons might be being pressed. So every now and then, rarely, the device can turn off, build up a little bit of charge, turn back on. You accidentally press the buttons in your pocket, and then that can reset it. That's happened to me 3 or 4 times, but that can happen. So you really want to remember, if you're using it, you change the battery every few hours, and that'll never happen.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions today for the M1. And in the next video, we will focus on another micropulse, and we'll have questions for that one. We have the A9, there's several other micropulses, and thank you for your time and your intelligence for today, Dr. Ravid Dennis.
Thank you very much. As always, it's great talking to you. Okay. See you later.